So we've been doing integrated supportive housing since the very beginning. And that model has certainly expanded and sort of grown where vulnerable populations live in mixed settings with a generic population. So we've been doing that for a very long time. And I think many of us sort of feel that the real focus is what we've talked about earlier, is that person-centered services, that it's not the numerical number, but that the services enable residents to live independently within the communities where they are living. And they have vibrant life within those communities. So it's less about buildings, it's less about the number or percentage of a particular population within a building, and more about the services, which sometimes the discussion on Olmstead sort of misses, and it often feels like the justice is sort of pushing a number on us. So I don't know if anyone has thoughts or comments on that.
I mean, again, being part of the lengthy discussions around the adult home and the nursing home settlement, you have a range of opinions, and there are some people at the federal government that take a very strong opinion about integration as defined as no more than X percentage of people in a building that have disabilities. The reality is, when some of those conversations, you could say you have a building that has 25% of the units for people with disabilities and 75% for not, but guaranteed X percentage of that 75% that people are going to have some type of a disability. And I really agree with what you're saying, that it's really, do people have their own place? Do they have their own ability to cook, like what we call our SROs, but are really efficiency apartments? That's an apartment, person has a key, they can come and go as they please, but there's supports there for them. Now, in the past, we did buildings that just had people with disabilities. Now we're going to be doing mixed, and a lot of the supporting housing providers, especially the ones that have worked with HPD, have been doing that for years. We're going to have to see in the discussions with the federal government what position they'll take around a percentage mix. I've heard from some of the providers that right now, the way we fund housing, a 60-40, 60 with supported housing funding and 40 without seems to work. I don't know what the federal government will say about that, or do we need to get to that level of conversation with them? So we'll be working on that. There's actually a meeting on Monday with CMS and HUD, and there's going to be some of this conversation, and they're going to be shown some supportive housing programs. And I think after that kind of a conversation, we'll start to get a better read of where we'll be able to go with that.
If I could just add something, and yes, the Justice Department is pushing New York and states to comply with Olmstead, and it's appropriate. But at the same time, the federal government, and we have been pushing on this, and there's now, thanks to Charles King and others, a national group that's really pushing CMS to allow states to begin to really get federal funding to provide additional supportive housing for the Medicaid population. For the folks we're talking about in Olmstead, folks with disabilities, if we want them to live in the least restrictive setting possible, we have to acknowledge the fact that we have to have a way to pay for that. And Medicaid pays for nursing homes, right? Medicaid pays for someone, and I think that for folks who maybe saw this in Sunday New York Times, pictures of the now closed Kohler Goldwater facility here in New York City, long-standing HC facility, where you and I went and toured that place before it closed, and which you would walk the halls and you'd see individuals who had disabilities, who had medical conditions, who didn't need to be in Kohler Goldwater, didn't need to be in an environment which was one of the more expensive environments that someone could be from a Medicaid payment standpoint, but were there because there were no other options. They didn't fall into one of the categories for which supportive housing exists. They had diagnoses, they had other issues that did not make them an easy candidate for an existing slot in one of our supportive housing. and to me, it sort of cried out for the fact that we need the federal government to embrace the idea that we need to think much more broadly about housing needs if we are ever going to get to the Olmstead's true goal of least restrictive setting. I mean, we'd be making even greater strides in Medicaid redesign and housing if we could double our money, double that investment of $388 million, and make it over $700 million. And that's possible if the federal government approved it. It's within their power, within the context of a waiver, to do that, but they, to the date, have not. But our hope is that as these discussions continue, and there's a meeting on Monday on this with HUD and HHS coming together, hopefully we can further convince them that if we really want to get to the goals inspired by the Olmstead decision, we really need to think differently about how we fund this type of housing.
And just real quick, there's a range of federal participation. I think right now there could be some opportunities for Medicaid to pay for some of the supports as long as you craft it in a medical context. And then there's capital, and then there's ongoing rent subsidies. And I think that the big cost going out, other than the supports, is the ongoing rent subsidies. But the federal government pays for capital in hospitals now. I mean, Medicaid does, and in nursing homes. So we've made that point in the past, and we'll continue to make it. So there's the capital piece, and then there's the real nut to crack, which would be the rent support piece. But any help from the federal government in any of those buckets would be able to allow us to do more.
Great. Thank you. You've all referenced the sort of collaboration, and we've certainly noticed it, the collaboration that exists among all the state agencies, and thank you for that. Would like to sort of hear some of your thoughts on how the state is going to continue to streamline things, make the development process more flexible for developers. So maybe Daryl and Kristin, you'd like to sort of talk about that.
Good. Well, first, thank you for recognizing the collaboration, and to be honest, it ain't always easy. And it is because of the leadership of my respective colleagues that are here that we've been able to achieve what we have. And I think that, you look at the end goal, and then you back up and figure out how to get there and share in the success. That's really been how we've been able to achieve some of the things that we have. But we're continuing to work to ensure the smooth process for application. I know that there's been some streamlining of portals so that you don't have to run around to all the agencies, that you can kind of have a one-stop shop. Those opportunities have shown some success, and I'm sure that there'll be conversations on how we can expand that. We also have been, our staffs have been in continual conversations about expected projects, and we continue to have those conversations while those projects work their way through the pipeline, which makes it a little bit easier for us to, again, achieve these great successes. And it's difficult, too, because it's a big state, so the protocols in one part of the state are totally different from somewhere else. So not only do we need to have the greater knowledge in how to get this done, but we also need to have the regionally savvy staff who also understands those local protocols because they're ever-changing. So, it's really just about being committed to the end product, which is creating quality, affordable housing for New Yorkers.
Kristin, would you like that?
Sure. I think, one of the things that we've done through the Homeless Housing and Assistance Program in particular to increase the amount of cross-agency cooperation, in a couple of things really. One is the HHAP RFP is on an open application submission basis, and we really moved in that direction over the last several years to give providers and developers an opportunity to use HHAP as a potential resource to be able to either leverage other funds, or to be able to think about it as part of an overall package of funding for perhaps a larger project. So trying to move away from very rigid timelines. I mean, there always have to be certain timelines and in anything that we're working on, but by going to this more open RFP process, it allows greater flexibility so that, for example, if one of our colleagues in another agency is putting out a funding opportunity that for some reason has to have a more regimented time frame, maybe there are federal deadlines or something, our ability to have HHAP funding be a potential resource to that project on a more flexible application schedule, I think has helped. We've also taken steps over the last couple of years to streamline our operating programs. OTDA has several operating programs that can be used to operate and provide supportive services once a housing unit is developed. And there used to be a handful of separate programs that had to be separately applied for, and the application cycles didn't always line up, but the purposes of the programs were, in some cases, substantially similar. And so we moved to basically compress those and consolidate those to make it easier for providers that wanted to apply to be able to not only apply for one funding stream and be able to use it more broadly, but also to have a greater range of flexibility in the kinds of services they might be able to provide to a particular target population. So they didn't have to, if they wanted to serve a particularly complex population, apply under 3 or 4 or 5 different operating support programs, but rather submit one proposal to be able to provide 4 or 5 or 6 different types of services to their target population. So we've really tried to take steps in that regard. When we get an application for HHAP capital funding, and it involves, for example, a provider that is going to operate services that require licensure from one of our sister agencies, we share the application up front with that agency so that we can review it comprehensively, rather than trying to figure out ourselves, whether that's a viable certification, or make an award where it turns out the provider's for some reason not able to obtain that certification. We would rather know up front, and even if the application is not successful, I think by getting that information from our other agencies and state government that are involved in the review process, it helps us also to provide better technical assistance to an applicant that may not be selected in a particular round for funding, but it helps to inform the discussion and the technical assistance that we provide so that hopefully it comes back as a stronger application the next time around.
Great, thank you.